Hey everyone, back here at HumanX 2026. I'm super excited to be here with Mazy, the CEO of Here, which is previously known as OpenFin. For folks not familiar with Here, why don't you quickly describe what you guys do, what you built?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me. Great to be here. Yeah, so we have built a browser for work. And that when we think about work, that's the combination of security, but also productivity and AI enablement. We come at it from the perspective of having worked with a lot of big banks within the finance space, JP Morgan, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, et cetera, from whom we learned what it takes to have a browser that gives you the kind of the productivity and security that's needed. So yeah, that's the journey we're on.
Talk a little bit about the origin of this. So previously it was called OpenFin,
Yep.
Fin meaning financial, and talked
Yeah.
about the banks here. Why did these financial institutions need, a different browser, something other than, Internet Explorer, Chrome, or something they were
Yeah. Yeah.
using? And where did it come from?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, banks have actually been building things they call platforms for many years now, like well ahead of us existing as a company. And what a platform would have in it is just lots of different apps for work, some internal, some third party. And what they were doing was essentially building these things from scratch, like before we came along. When we came along, we decided to focus on web architecture. And so we were early to adopt Google Chromium as like the underlying basis of our engine. And initially, what we were doing was providing them with a Chromium runtime uh, that's completely headless, like no interface, and they could build whatever they wanted on top, right? And so the idea was, instead of building .NET applications and Java applications and that kind of thing, you could just build web apps that look and feel native, but they're deployed just like any other web application, right? What happened along the way is we saw banks and asset managers and hedge funds and others all doing something quite similar, which was essentially building their own browser interfaces, right? And like building their own kind of windowing and search and other visual components. And the reason they were doing that was that they find like you know um you know the productivity features lacking in a typical browser, right? Most people can understand that as like tab overload, right? Or switching in and out of tabs all day long, right? Not knowing where the apps are, searching in lots of different places to find the information they need, right? And so we essentially took the learning from all the banks and all the folks that we work with, and that's what it turned into the product that's now called Here. We rebranded a couple years ago. Um, and actually, the reason we did that was we realized the product we built wasn't specifically financial. It's actually really relevant to any regulated industry. And we had already started working outside of finance, so we wanted a name that was less fin.
Yeah,
Yeah.
expand beyond your first,
Yeah.
your first chapter. When you were describing people building on top of this browser platform, it reminded me a lot of what I've built stuff on top of Electron, the
Yep.
open source, Chromium kind of
Yep.
runtime that I know Slack and Notion and a bunch of other kind of web apps that wrap their experience. Now, Electron is kind of just Chromium with like a few hooks inside of it. Can
Hmm.
you talk a little bit about? It sounds like there's more advanced features
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
maybe
Many.
deployment or
Yeah.
security. Yeah, what does that kind of look
Yeah.
like?
Yeah. So, so first of all, we use Electron. Uh, the We predate Electron, so we were around for several years before Electron was even a concept. We later adopted it. So there are actually a few different issues when it comes to Electron. So the number one, and this this was sort of like what we uh, had like lots of debates about in the early days of like, should we use this? What does it mean for our business, etc. Um, so the first is that you know, essentially, when you're building with Electron, you're building a native installed app with JavaScript.
Right, everything gets bundled in, all your assets,
Yeah,
like JavaScript that runs or whatever, TypeScripts.
yeah,
It's like a
but you're
fully
still installing.
installable.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and when it comes to enterprise, uh, That's actually really problematic because, you know, software packaging process at a big bank or any big enterprise that's essentially managed by IT can take forever.
Mm.
And for that reason, particularly with third-party software, people can be on like literally annual upgrade cycles, which is insane, right? Like, just imagine like that's you
A
get
year's a
one
long
product
time.
here. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
people
Especially in the
are
AI
doing like
era.
hundreds a day,
Yeah. Yeah.
hundreds of deployments a day, and like from that to a year, it's just like it's unworkable. So that's the first issue. Second issue is that Electron, just by the nature of like how it works, it does introduce a bunch of security concerns that we had, frankly, and that our customers had. So you know the first way that we were already different, but like maintained our architecture was the runtime, the underlying foundation of here. We call it here core. That's still you're building web apps. They're web deployed just like in Chrome or Edge or any other browser. You're not installing the assets. We do things like caching and all the rest of it, but same as a browser would. Second is, the additional security. Third, which is very unique, doesn't exist in any other browser, is an interoperability bus that actually allows, you know, uh, apps in tabs that are otherwise process isolated to securely communicate locally on the device. Okay. And that helps with workflow, and, eliminates copy paste and, rekeying data from this app to that app. That's really critical. Uh, we also enable web apps that run in here to interoperate with native apps on the desktop, including Electron based apps.
Mm.
Okay. Now, why did we do all of this? Right? Because it's like, oh, that's a lot of great features. Literally every single capability that's in here was built because we found several huge customers needing these capabilities, right? And you know, um, beyond sort of the runtime, it's the visual components, the windowing components, search components, a notification center, now an AI center. So there's all these other capabilities that we found our customers needed, and essentially building all of that is how we got to here.
So to play that back, it sounds like there's a bunch of stuff that you are able to preserve with the value of the web. People can still update the applications. They're
Yeah,
not bundled like Electron. It's still kind of running as like a web app.
yeah,
But by running on top of the here browser experience, you can augment it with all these other search and the notifications and the
that's right.
AI
Yeah,
center and IPC and all that.
yeah, yeah. And so look, so just doubling down on web architecture, like that web deployment and the ability to quickly iterate is just like absolutely fundamental to innovation, right? So like breaking that, like we found to just be like not the right approach. Um, the uh, the next layer, when you talk about all the other capabilities that are really part of the browser rather than the underlying runtime, it's really about thinking of the browser as your workspace. Okay. And a unified workspace that brings together all the different applications that any given end user is using. Right. And, when you think about that, it's like over the last more than decade, there's been a huge proliferation in the number of apps and now AI apps that everybody uses for work. So whether it's Salesforce or ServiceNow or like any number of SaaS apps out there, and you guys power many of them, right? So it's like everybody is using lots of apps to do their work. And that means that now the human sitting in front of their browser or in front of their desktop is left to synthesize all that information and try to bring everything back together, right? So the human is the interoperability layer that's connecting the different apps. And the human is the one that has to figure out, what am I looking at? Where do I search for information? And so the whole idea is, can you take that familiar experience of a browser where people are already working, but change it in some fundamental ways that really unifies that workspace, gives you layouts that let you see all the information you want to see at the same time, uh, allows for interoperability and workflow, streamlines search, streamlines notifications, and now also, introduces AI into the entire mix.
As you're talking through this, it sounds more like a operating system, sort of,
Yeah,
on top of the operating system, but there's a
yeah,
lot
yeah,
of stuff there that's, the operating system does all the shared things that each
yeah,
application needs. Sounds like you're kind of
yeah,
providing that as a platform.
yeah. So it's funny you should say that. Uh, there was a time when we were calling it an operating system.
Mm.
Much to the chagrin of a couple of my board members who said it's not an OS. But yeah, look, and we actually used to say we're the operating system of finance.
Mm.
So totally with you on that. The the interesting thing about the web browser as the surface or the interface for the end user is that, like well before we came along, the browser was already the thing that made you device independent, right? So it's like I could be on a Mac, I could be on Windows, I could be on iOS, I could be on Android, right? And I'm using a browser that allows me to get access to the apps that I need without worrying about like what's the OS that I'm on, right? And essentially, what we've done is we've taken that that concept and said, okay, yeah, we like we like the positioning of the product in that layer right above the operating system, but it needs to do far more than your typical web browser does in order to give you the full experience. And so it's something simple like notifications. We have a notification center, right? Why did we build one? Well, a couple of the largest banks and asset managers said, like, I need an experience across Mac and Windows that's consistent and actually that does far more than the Mac and Windows notification centers do, right? So it's like, okay, that actually makes sense. And so, you know, uh, there are aspects to what we do that, like having our notification center that would tell you it's kind of like more like an OS, but it for sure sits right on top of the OS.
Well, as a personal lover of different developer platforms and operating systems, it makes me want to go check it out and build something on
Awesome.
top of it.
Would love
Yeah.
for you to check it out.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for stopping by. It's great to see you.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.